Welcome to Bible study. This is the Bible study which we are preparing for Sunday, November 9th in 2025 at St. Michael's Lutheran Church in Portland, Oregon. And this week, we're kicking off a new Bible study. We're going to be looking at Luther's Small Catechism, reviewing some of those things that are foundational for our Lutheran faith. But in so doing, we're not going to stop being a Bible study. We're going to look at the illustrations, stories, the words of wisdom, and the letters of the New Testament that speak to these very things that are in the Catechism. Because you see, the Catechism isn't really something other than what the Bible says. The Catechism is a summation. It is a exposition of the truths of Scripture. And so we want to talk about some of those underpinnings of the catechetical material as we go through this Bible study. So I'm standing here today in front of the reproduction we have hanging in our fellowship hall of the 95 Theses of Martin Luther. In fact, it's really not quite all of them because it went on to the next page. But and they're all in Latin, so you may or may not be able to read them. It was an academic dispute that Luther was trying to promote in 1517, and some people have even wondered whether he actually even ever really meant there to be an academic dispute. They certainly achieved one of his goals, and that was to wake up people to the question of indulgences, this sort of commodification of Jesus' forgiveness, that people were buying and selling it. But in terms of the documents that Luther wrote, it's really not all that important. It's important for the historical effect that it had and for sparking this thing called the Reformation. But in terms of what Luther did and what Luther wrote, it was very quickly forgotten because the Reformation, Luther, and others moved on from that question that those 95 Theses are dealing with. About 10 years after he wrote those, the Elector Frederick the Wise passed away. We oftentimes call him Frederick the Wise, but probably better he should be called Frederick the Crafty. He was a political animal through and through. He knew how to work the system better than anybody else at the time. And he used that system to protect Martin Luther and to give a place and room for these Reformation ideas to take root. When he passed away, he was succeeded by his brother, oftentimes called John the Steadfast. John was far more of a committed Lutheran than Frederick had been. In fact, there is no such thing as a Lutheran in 1527 yet. That word hasn't really even been coined. But he's far more committed to what Luther is trying to do. Where Frederick was always playing a political game, John is going to play a religious game. And one of the things he does at Luther's urging is he does a survey, an assay of the parish life and what's going on inside the congregations of Saxony. And what comes back from that is utterly horrifying to Dr. Luther and others. They find that people in the parishes of Saxony, they can hardly say the Lord's Prayer. They don't know the Ten Commandments. They have almost no knowledge of what's going on in their own Christian faith. They go to communion maybe 3, 4, or 5 times a year. They assert they are baptized, therefore they are Christian, but they really don't have a clue what that means. In response to this, Luther begins preaching a number of sermons. These become what he calls his large catechism. And from that large catechism, he then drafts also what's known as the small catechism. The intent was originally that this would be in every home and that it would be something that fathers and mothers would teach to their children in the home. That was probably a little ambitious on Luther's part. but it is still a document that deserves to be in every home. What happened in the ensuing generations was that it became really the piece of parochial education. Throughout the 16 and 1700s, if a congregation was calling a new pastor, the question they asked was not, is he a good preacher, or can he sing well, or how does he prepare for Sunday morning worship? The question they always asked was, how does he teach the catechism? That book, Luther's Small Catechism, became really the most successful book Luther ever wrote. It became the thing that shapes the Lutheran movement even to this day. When I was a young person, we were required to memorize the catechism, and then we were examined over the contents of the catechism on a Sunday morning in front of the whole congregation. It's a little terrifying when you were 14 years old, but it also forced me to put some of those things into my head and into my heart. And for that, I'm grateful to my father and those congregants long ago who said, no, this is what we want to do. I'm privileged to have, here it is, another little treasure besides the 95 Theses on the wall. Somebody some time ago gave me this. This is a facsimile. It's not an original copy. It's a facsimile of the original catechism by Martin Luther. It is a fascinating little book. Here's the page on the first commandment. I've scanned this, and so I will attach it to this YouTube video so you can see that page all by yourself, and put it on your screen if you would like on your computer. It's got lots of margins around the edge because Luther wanted them to be able to take notes, to make observations, to put these things into their heart. Luther's book would become, as we noted, would really become one of the pillars of the Lutheran movement. He wrote a lot of things. I have something like 55 volumes of Martin Luther's works on my shelf, but this is the one that has probably had the biggest impact. He goes through the 6 chief parts of the Christian faith: the 10 Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, baptism, the office of the keys, and the Lord's Supper. Those things have become the foundation for what it means for 500 years worth of Lutherans. In a couple of years, we're going to celebrate the 500th anniversary of that book. So I thought it might be good for us to spend a little bit of time as God's people looking at it. Luther starts with the first commandment, the 10 Commandments. We're going to do a couple or 3 sessions on this, on the 10 Commandments together. I want to just start, though, with the first commandment. You shall have no other gods, it says. Luther then asks a really interesting question. In our English catechisms, we probably say, what does this mean? But that isn't actually what Luther asks. In the original German, he simply says, Was ist das? What is that? He doesn't ask the meaning question yet. He asks what it actually says. The meaning will have to be developed in the course of your life. What is that? Well, Luther says we should fear and we should love and we should trust in God above all things. Luther will elsewhere say that one's God is, and everybody has one, that one's God is that person or thing that you trust more than anything else, that you look for more than anything else to be the good of your life, that thing which is going to help you the most. That's your God. Now, if that is the God above, if that is the Lord, that's a true Christian worship, a true Christian faith. If that is the God who will raise you from the dead, who sustains you in body and soul, if that is the God who leads you as a shepherd, who guides you through the valley of the shadow of death, whose discipline is welcome because he loves you, that's a Christian faith. If that is the God who went to a cross and died for you to give you new life, that's a Christian faith. But it is always the temptation of humanity to imagine that I could have another God. Adam and Eve were essentially doing that when they ate that forbidden fruit. They were making themselves into gods. And that's really the most common form of idolatry. Even the gods of ancient Greece and Rome and places like that were oftentimes really self-reflections. Reflections of the people who are worshiping them. They were oftentimes worshiping themselves. It tells us that in chapter 20, Moses went up on that mountain and God gave him these 10 commandments. But God gave him a whole bunch of other things while he's there. If you'll read in Exodus chapter 20 and following, you'll find that Moses got a whole 12 chapters worth of material. It's somewhat confusing in the terms of the way Moses writes it as to when he actually is up there and when he's down, but finally we read in chapter 32 that the people of God, the people saw that Moses delayed coming down the mountain. And they gathered themselves unto Aaron, and they said to him, "Make us gods, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. He's been up on this mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. It's been rumbling up there like a volcano. We think he might be dead." Aaron, maybe not a man with the most spine, simply caves in front of this request. He says to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And so all the people took off the rings of gold they had in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast of the Lord." And they rose up early the next day, and they offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and then they rose to play. The calf was associated with several Middle Eastern fertility cults. They descended into an orgy that fast. We oftentimes imagine that the first commandment is telling us that we should have our heart straight. And it's true, that's what it does. But what the first commandment is really doing is telling us to have our life straight as well. For those two things are never actually separated. The people of Israel pursued another god, and immediately their moral life goes off the rails, and they start into the very deplorable things that God is casting out the Canaanites in front of them for. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down to your people, those whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt. They have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly from the way I commanded them. They have made themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" And the Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation out of you." I'll start over, Moses, just with you, and maybe this time it will work. We look at what these people of Israel are doing, and we are tempted to say they are so foolish. But are we any less so? The temptation today is probably not to melt down our gold and make a golden calf and declare it to be our God. Rather, it is to, as the Latin phrase is, to live etsi Deus non dabetur, as if there is not a God. That is the idolatry of our age. To think that God just doesn't exist. There's nobody up there. There's nobody out there. There's nobody in here except me. That also has a really disastrous effect on the lives of people. The rest of the 10 Commandments, as we are going to learn, are actually broken always first by breaking that first commandment. One does not steal, for instance, without imagining that that money, that thing that I am about to steal, whatever it is, that is what is going to give me the greatest good. And so I will worship it with my behavior. And I will take this thing, whether that is someone's life, or whether that is to ruin a relationship, or whether that is to steal a thing, or to steal their reputation. I will do this thing because I think it's going to be really good for me. And so I have first broken this first commandment. They seem so foolish. They seem like us. Moses implored the Lord of his God and said, "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, 'I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord relented." It's a very important word. The word almost there is he repented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing upon his people. Moses' arguments are essentially twofold. First, he says, God, it's going to be really bad public relations if you do this. Everybody's going to say, what a terrible God. He brought them out into the desert just to kill them. But then I think he uses the far more powerful argument, and he reminds God of the promises that he made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. So Moses turned and went down from the mountain. He had the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back, and they were written. They were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a noise in the camp." But he said, "It is not the sound of the shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but it is the sound of singing that I hear. And as soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned hot, and he threw those tablets down out of his hands and broke them on the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire, and he ground it to powder and scattered it upon the water, and he made the people of Israel drink it. First commandment, you shall have no other gods. What does that mean? What is that? Well, to have no other gods is to fear and to trust and to love God with your whole heart above everything else. It is a wise way to live. It's a good way to live. We'll talk more about this on Sunday. God bless you.